Hi, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our panel, Combating Voter Suppression, What Can Libraries Do? This program is brought to you by the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, or SRRT, and co-sponsored by the Government Documents Roundtable, or GODORT. Both roundtables are units within the American Library Association, or ALA. My name is April Shepard, and I am the past coordinator of SRRT. Before we begin, I hope you will grant me a moment to go over some reminders. Captions can be enabled by clicking More in the bottom right of the screen, then clicking Show Captions. Please keep your mic and camera off unless you are speaking. The Q&A can be used to pose questions to the panelists as we speak, and we will get to the questions at the end of all the presentations. If you do not see the Q&A button on your screen, you may have to also go to More to see the Q&A button. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be available via the SRRT website by the end of the month. Finally, SRRT believes that libraries and librarians must recognize and help solve social problems and inequities, to work for the common good, and to bolster democracy. Free programming, such as this programming we're doing today, is one of the ways we try to achieve that mission. If you are a SRRT member, I want to thank you. It's your dues that help us do this type of events. And if you're not a SRRT member, I hope that you would consider joining SRRT. Donations are also accepted at the link that we will provide in the chat in a moment, and specifying SRRT when you donate. We could not do great programming and work like this without support. Now on to our program. With up to a quarter of the world's population voting, 2024 is being called the super election year and is expected to be the largest election year in history. Worldwide, it is estimated that 2 billion people have either voted already or will vote in one of 64 national elections. Fair elections are threatened by misinformation, disinformation, and even threats of violence. In the United States, in addition to the presidential election that I'm sure we're all very much aware of, citizens will be voting for 34 Senate seats, 435 representative seats, 11 governors, 10 attorney generals, and numerous state and local officials. For many of us, it is the state and local elections that will have the greatest impact as we fight to maintain reproductive freedom, LGBTQ plus rights, and even keep our libraries open. It's now my pleasure to introduce the panelists. I'm going to introduce all three of them at once. Aaron Wilson is the Government Documents Coordinator at the University of Maryland Libraries in College Park, Maryland. His extensive expertise spans nearly 2 decades within various academic and research libraries, with a particular focus on cataloging, metadata, and government information. Additionally, Aaron serves as the GODORT Education Committee Chair. Our second panelist, Frida Afari, is an Iranian-American public librarian, recently retired from the Los Angeles Public Library. She's the author and translator, the director at large at the ALA Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, and co-chair of the PEN America's Translation Committee. And finally, Nancy Cronick teaches at the Rutgers University School of Communication Information, in the Library and Information Science program. In 2000-2001, she served as ALA president, focusing on the roles of libraries and democracies. Since that time, she founded and led ALA's Center for Civic Lives, the library's foster community engagement membership initiative group, and helped launch the Libraries Transform Communities program. Cronick was a member of the U.S. delegation to the Dartmouth Conference in Zavio, Russia in 2017, and Washington, D.C. in 2018. She also served as the American co-convener of the U.S.-Russian dialogue on the civic role of libraries in the 21st century. Her ALA Legacy Society project, Libraries Transformed Communities Engagement Grant, funds innovative projects in libraries. Finally, she has received ALA's Ken Haycock Award in 2015 and was named to the Freedom to Read Foundation Roll of Honor in 2016. Aaron, would you like to get us started?
Certainly. Thank you so much, April. Thank you to the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, as well as to my fellow panel members, Nancy and Frida. I enjoyed the dialogue that we've had going forward initially as we've done this project and this past presentation, as well as to I see in our meeting Andy Crawley and my fellow members of the Government Documents Roundtable for their continued support of the Education Committee and the work with regarding the voter and elections toolkit. This particular emphasis on voting, especially in this political season that we're in, is not only timely, but is very much needed. As April highlighted, we are in a very big election year, not only here in the United States, but across the world. And our hope and our desire in regards to government documents, particularly with the Education Committee, is to make sure that librarians as well as patrons are given all the necessary tools and resources to make the choices they feel are needed for not only themselves, but for their community. So in reference to the GODORT's Voter and Elections Toolkit, the toolkit initially came about in 2019 as part of a project of the Emerging Leaders Program for ALA. When this project was launched, this was in about 2019, right before the pandemic, and the hope was to give better resource support to states, both states like myself in Maryland and across the country, of how to locate information to register to vote, as well as for materials for absentee. Who would have thunk that when we got to the pandemic that this particular resource that was being thought of would come in handy? So having that access to information regarding how to register to vote, how to go for absentee voting, this came into play. And for the last two election cycles, 2019, the 2020 election and the 2022 midterm election, the voter elections toolkit has been used to assist with making sure librarians as well as individuals who are eligible to vote would have the necessary and correct information to make the decisions and trying to get ready to vote. So I do have on the next slide a QR code which is active that takes you to the voter and elections toolkit. So the voter and elections toolkit that has been created by GODORT is a LibGuide which organizes voter resource information for every state and federal jurisdiction, in the case of the District of Columbia, in regards to how to register to vote, the important dates and deadlines for registration, as well as submitting absentee information. For those states that require voter identification, they have voter ID rules. We have taken particular emphasis in making sure we have spelled out the details and how of what materials may be required. Most states require a regular photo ID that can be acquired in most cases from the Department of Motor Vehicles. In some instances, there are alternatives if a person may not have them. So we, in each of the various states that require this particular rule, have identified within each of the LibGuides those particular materials. So an example of that may be a utility bill, or if you are a student, your student ID may be accepted in some jurisdictions, but not. So it's important that we have deciphered in which jurisdictions that information is key and is important for getting that information across. Lastly, we look at a voter accessibility. Individuals may have various accessibility needs. So in a majority of states, there are regulations in place and procedures in place to ensure that individuals have the same rights and the same access to voting at a poll location, as well as for assistance with getting the proper tools or resources to allow them to vote. Each state has that information listed within their respective LibGuide. Well, this information is quite reliable for, again, first-time voters who may not know anything in regards to I've registered to vote, but to give them details in regards to what they may need to know for voting. Individuals relocating to different states and jurisdictions, individuals that move, this is a very good resource. And a big hunk of this goes towards our college age voters who may also be first-time voters who may not be sure of which way they want to go. Here at the University of Maryland, I'm currently part of their voter outreach team. we our hope in using resources like the GODORT Voter Elections Toolkit is to give individuals options for knowing where they would like to vote. We have students who are living in the Maryland, DC metro area who may want to vote in their respective jurisdiction or here in College Park. But we also have individuals from surrounding states like New York, the Commonwealth of Virginia, New Jersey. And these resources allow them to know not only how to register to vote, but also to make sure they have the proper tools and resources to make those things possible. So all of that is found here in the toolkit. I'm going to take a quick look and I'll show an example. When you come to the website, you'll see, or to the LibGuide, you'll see this listing of the toolkit with the various states that are listed on the left. Let's look here at the state of Maryland, for example. Here, we give all the necessary information in regards to the voter registration eligibility rules, as well as various deadlines that are in place for the state. In our next section, usually for voter ID, this will traditionally fluctuate depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, but the ID requirements are listed along with how to purchase or how to acquire ID. In this case, for the state of Maryland, all of that is done through the Motor Vehicles Administration. And then the other information that corresponds of how to cast the ballots, which includes absentee voting information here for voters with disabilities, the disability rights information, balloting, polling hours and locations, information for people who may need rides to the polls and who may be able to provide transportation to various polling places. Election information on each state, as well as important dates, ballots, initiatives, campaign finance information. We've tried to put as much resource support in this guide for each state that we believe will be of use to voters for, again, them to make sound decisions of where they feel they should do in regards to casting their ballots. So all of that information is similar to what we have here for Maryland, but it's in all of the various voter LibGuides that we have in our toolkit. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to these individuals who have given a lot of time and effort to making this toolkit possible. These individuals, in their spare time, have gone and combed through making sure links are correct, making sure that the information is right, that has been updated. And without their support and their impact in doing this work, this toolkit would not be possible. So I thank each of these editors for their continued support in making sure that our voters and people all across this country have the information they need to vote and to make sure that they can share that with individuals across the country. And with that, I thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Aaron. So Aaron has his email there. You could also put your questions in the Q&A for the end of the presentation. And now we're going to move over to Frida. And I'm going to drive for Frida. So let me share my screen. All right. And let me know when you're ready, Frida.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. And thank you all for coming. So I wrote out my presentation because I wanted to stay within my time limit. And let's start. So in the fall of 2024, we're facing the most consequential election in US history. As many commentators have argued, we have the chance to save our limited democracy or plunge into complete authoritarianism. The type of voter suppression that we can expect for this election is not limited to gerrymandering and the creation of physical barriers to voting. The most powerful voter suppression technique is now the use of misinformation and disinformation to confuse voters or to encourage them not to vote at all as a sign of protest. Would you please go to the next slide? Oh, I mean, sorry, the previous slide. Yes, thank you. I mean, it is critical for libraries and especially public libraries not only to encourage patrons to vote, and do everything possible to facilitate voting, but also to educate patrons about the various types of misinformation and disinformation that they might encounter. As librarians, we need to be in command of the facts about issues that are being weaponized for the purpose of confusing people in this election season. That is why in my presentation today, I would like to take up some of those issues, review the common points of misinformation and disinformation being spread about them, and contrast those to the actual facts of the matter. So I will briefly look at the following issues. And next slide, please. The state of the economy, the US economy, the immigration crisis, the state of crime in the US, the war in Ukraine, and the war between Israel and Palestine. Then I will argue that it is only when libraries actively help the public learn about the facts that we can truly help people make informed decisions and exercise their democratic right to vote. I will conclude by offering some Pathfinder brochures that the Social Responsibilities Roundtable has created for this purpose. So next slide, please. The state of the US economy. Disinformation. What is the main type of disinformation that we are facing? The US economy is in shambles and unemployment is high. Next slide, please. Now, what are the facts? By common capitalist standards, the US economy is doing well. The gross domestic product is up. During the past 2 years, the unemployment rate has declined to 3.3% and then recently increased to 4.2%. Wages have increased in real terms and not only relatively. By all these standards, the economy is doing better than under the previous administration or various administrations before it. The rise in the inflation rate, however, has been felt by the majority of the population in terms of the cost of food, housing, and gasoline. In 2019, the average inflation rate was 1.8%. In 2022, it went up to as high as 9%. Currently, it is down to 3.3%. The cost of housing continues to be unaffordable for millions, tens of millions. The rise in inflation has had two main reasons. One, the COVID-19 pandemic killed 35 million people around the world, including over 1 million in the US. The massive human loss, which translated into a loss of the labor force, damaged the global supply chain. That was the first main reason. Second main reason for the rise in inflation is Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 22 led to an increase in the price of oil and of many basic food items. There is also a general sense of malaise about jobs being replaced by new technology and a sense of alienation and dissatisfaction about the mechanical and transactional nature of work and human relations in our advanced capitalist society. Learning about these facts can help the public recognize that the economy isn't a rabbit out of someone's hat, but is the product of our human labor and large objective and global factors. Next slide, please. Okay, next topic, the immigration crisis. What is the main type of disinformation that we're facing? The US has been invaded by gangs of immigrants. They are all criminals. They're taking away jobs from citizens and, quote, poisoning the blood of our country, unquote. Next slide, please. What are the facts? There is currently a global migration crisis. According to the United Nations Health Commissioner for Refugees, there are currently over 110 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. Various factors have accounted for the massive increase in the forcibly displaced and refugee population in the past decade. These include growing authoritarianism, wars, and global warming. In the US, we're facing a humanitarian crisis at the southern border where refugees fleeing poverty, violence, authoritarianism, and climate change are attempting to enter the US in search of work and a better life, but mostly face rejection, arrest, and detention. Currently, parents with children make up 40% of migrants into the US. Those migrants who enter by crossing the border illegally or applying for asylum at the border and waiting inside the US for a court date have a precarious existence and face much abuse. They are exploited as workers and as women, including as child laborers. And if mass deportation becomes a reality, all the undocumented face the threat of being put in large concentration camps because no country is going to accept millions of deported, undocumented migrants being sent out of the US. The US Congress is divided and thus unable to ratify comprehensive immigration reform. Thus, neither those who are arriving now nor the nearly 11 million undocumented immigrants who have been living, working, and paying taxes in this country for years are able to find a pathway to legalization and citizenship. At the same time, the US also has a serious labor shortage and currently has over 10 million job openings. It desperately needs new immigrants to fill many of those open positions. The US also has a shrinking young population. Many schools are closing because they don't have enough students. So contrary to claims about immigrants being criminals, studies have shown that immigrants are significantly less likely to commit crimes than US born. Learning about these facts can help the public cut through the xenophobic propaganda and hopefully become receptive to finding global and humane solutions. Next slide. Okay, the state of crime in the US. Okay, the main type of disinformation that we face is, quote, crime is rampant and out of control like never before. What are the facts? Next slide. During the pandemic, violent crime, including murder and domestic abuse, went up. The rate is now decreasing. The murder rate went down by 13% nationwide from 2022 to 2023. Sexual assault, robbery, and assault are going up in some cities, such as New York City, but are generally going down to their pre-pandemic levels in most cities. During the past 4 years, there have been historic increases in the amounts of federal money going to both the police and to community-based mental health, drug, and homeless assistance programs to limit violence, police intervention, and incarceration. The police in the US is heavily militarized and police brutality is prevalent. The US has the highest rate of incarceration in the world after China. There are over 1.9 million people in US prisons and jails and detention centers on any given day, a number which has declined by about 400,000 since 2020. Efforts to promote gun control legislation have faced strong opposition from many legislators and the powerful National Rifle Association. In the US, a country with a population of 342 million people, there are 400 million guns owned by civilians. Gun violence is the #1 killer of youth under 18. Of the 48,000 who died by gun violence in 2022 in the US, half had committed suicide. Guns are frequently used in domestic and intimate partner violence, with women and especially women of color and LGBTQ as victims. The Surgeon General has declared gun violence a public health crisis. So learning about these facts can help the public put the crime rate in perspective and also demand policies that address the root causes of crime. Next slide, please. The war in Ukraine. Disinformation. The war in Ukraine is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. Ukrainians are just pawns promoting NATO's interests. Russia has a right to take over Ukraine because Ukraine was part of its empire for several hundred years. What Russia does in Europe is Europe's business and does not affect us in the US. So this is all disinformation. And what are the facts? Next slide, please. What is known as present-day Ukraine had been annexed by the Russian Empire in the 1700s and had a long history of resistance against Russian colonialism. It declared its independence in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 2014, Russia, under the rule of Vladimir Putin, invaded Ukraine, occupied Crimea and part of eastern Ukraine. In February of 2022, Russia launched a full-scale imperialist invasion to take over all of Ukraine. Since then, the Russian army has killed over 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers and has injured over 120,000 Ukrainians. It has systematically bombed civilian infrastructure and used chemical weapons. It has raped women and men and abducted tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. Russia's 2014 and 2022 invasions were aimed at recolonizing Ukraine and enslaving its population, which wants a democratic system. Vladimir Putin's goal is to restore Russia's former status as an empire and is thus not limited to taking over Ukraine. The Russian invasion has worsened the global refugee crisis by causing the displacement of over 14 million people, mostly women and children, out of a Ukrainian population of 44 million. Russia's invasion has led to ecological poisoning, as well as food shortages and a major hike in the price of energy and food around the world. Russia has blocked the export of agricultural goods from Ukraine, which feed millions around the world. So by learning these facts about Russia's brutal invasion, the US public can see that the economic security and physical safety and democratic rights of the people in the US, Ukraine, and the world are indeed intertwined. Putin cannot be allowed to, quote, do whatever the hell they want, unquote. Next slide, please. The Israel-Palestine war. Disinformation. All Palestinians support Hamas. All Israelis are settler colonialists. The land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea cannot be shared by Palestinians and Israeli Jews living in peaceful coexistence. One side has to rule all. What are the facts? Next slide, please. The facts are that the majority of the Palestinian population of 2.3 million in Gaza oppose Hamas. The Palestinian opposition to Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is not a monolith and embodies various perspectives. Inside Israel, there are peace activists who oppose Israel's occupation of United Nations recognized Palestinian territories. They support Palestinian self-determination and peaceful coexistence. The Israeli population is also not a monolith. There are Palestinian and Israeli Jews who believe in the right of both peoples to share the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Their peaceful solutions include the formation of one democratic and secular state or two democratic and secular states in confederation with free movement between them. Learning about these facts can help us see how important it is for us to vote to exert pressure on our government to bring about a just and peaceful solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And so, in conclusion, the above was a demonstration of the ways in which librarians can be prepared to confront disinformation. I'm sorry, would you please go to the slide about the conclusion? Thank you. The next one, please. No, I think there's one before it. No? Yes, that one. Thank you. So the above was a demonstration of the ways in which libraries can be prepared to confront disinformation and offer facts related to the burning issues of the day as we prepare for the most consequential election in US history. The Social Responsibilities Roundtable has prepared a series of pathfinders for library staff and patrons to learn more about these and other current events. In addition to the topics covered today, these pathfinders include topics such as abortion rights. If you'd like, now please go to the slide about the pathfinders. So in addition to the topics covered today, these pathfinders include topics such as abortion rights, gender identity and sexual orientation, book bans and African American history, the crisis in US K-12 education, and the world's worst humanitarian crisis, which is the war in Sudan, which hardly anybody talks about. We encourage library staff to share these pathfinders with the public and use them as the basis for organizing current events discussions. Such discussions can promote global awareness and facilitate a truly educational, fruitful, and civil conversation with the aim of developing creative solutions to national and global problems. The next 54 days will be critical for the effort to preserve our democracy and our libraries. Voting in the November election is about whether our democracy lives or dies. It is about whether we confront or bow to authoritarianism. It will not only affect our lives, but the lives of many generations to come. Thank you very much. And finally, I would like to provide you with some contact information. The one before it, please, that has social responsibility. Yes, so this is a social responsibilities roundtable. If you'd like to go to our website, and there's also a page where you can send in emails. And the pathfinders are there. And then this is my own contact information, my email address. And then the next slide, please. So I have all of my references. I think we have two slides, 2 or 3 slides that are just references. And so for every fact that I presented today, I have references from highly reputable sources backing those facts. So you're welcome to fact check my work. Thank you so much for listening and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Frida. All right. Nancy, are you ready?
Just about. Let me make sure I got this right. It's always challenging when I have to do it under pressure. Can you see my slides?
We can see your host screen.
The host screen, wrong. Okay, wait a minute here. Hold on. Can you see it now?
It's your host screen again.
I think you need to click on slideshow.
Yeah, you're right. I always get them mixed up which to do first, because once I get the slideshow, then I have no controls. Okay, now, does that work?
Yeah.
Thank
There we
you.
go.
Always my challenge. Okay, so thank you both. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity to work with all of you, and I'm so glad CERT is doing this again. I know in 2020 they did a great film series on the same issue that we picked up at Rutgers, and I really salute them for keeping the issue alive. And it's great to be back with ALA. I had so much energy in San Diego, but then the summer happened. So we couldn't have had better timing for this event today. So thank you all for coming. So I was president of ALA in 2000 when we had another really important election. And as part of my democracy initiative, I put forth a booklet, which I still have lots of, in case anybody still wants one, but it's very out of date, called Smart Voting Starts at Your Library. And I was really glad when past president Emily Dubinsky said that we were going to focus on these issues again this year, although in 2020, we also did a great job, thanks to Megan Cusick, I think, who's on this webinar. And when Emily brought these new tools out, she said libraries have a long history of providing information and services that help voters participate in our democracy. Libraries aren't just a place for reading. They are also a great place to get ready to vote. And I think as my colleagues have said, it couldn't be more important than it is this year. So I'm really glad that ALA, after all these years, has picked up the mantle again and really committed itself to not only talking about how do we inform voters, but also how do we get voters to participate. So this is a spectrum of participation, a scale. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's put out by the International Association for Public Participation. And those of us who do work in this area like to use this scale to point out that it's a continuum. So if you look at the left and inform, that's really what the GODORT guide and Aaron was talking about, is how do we keep people well informed? Something that libraries have always done well and continue to do well. But as we go up this spectrum or scale, we probably have less experience. So what Frida was talking about is the consultative part about giving, trying to counter misinformation. That's a really important part as well. What I'm going to talk today about is how do we move up the scale into involvement, collaboration, and empowerment. So greater participation from the public. And I might add that, we've been involved and talked about how libraries are important to an informed citizenry. But I like to talk about an informed and engaged citizenry. I think we're all aware that we may have a lot more access to information, but that does not engage our voters or our citizens or anybody unless we really do much more actively get them involved. So I'm delighted that ALA has put out some great guides this year, some background guides, and you can go to their new site, Ready Voter Ready. It's terrific. Lots of great resources. Again, thanks to ALA and Megan Cusick and others who've worked on this. They have several guides. They've got guides for users. They've got guides to help libraries get more involved and find partners. And they talk about how democracy is everyone's business. So it's really important, I think, for us to use these tools to really get across to the public that we are in the business of helping not only to inform, but engage. So That GODORT guide is a fantastic guide. Those of us who are on college campuses where every student, like at Rutgers, is not from our own state, New Jersey. And so when we're trying to help them, these laws are not only really complex and difficult to penetrate, but in New Jersey, for example, every county can be different in some of its practices. And so many students, if they want to vote absentee when they're on campus, some of them just showed up and they have to act immediately. And if they're not from New Jersey, or if they're not from Maryland, or if they're not from California, or wherever you're from, we have to know more. So this guide is just fantastic. And I was really pleased that our Rutgers librarian helped to put together the first one in 2020, and it's only gotten better since. So terrific way to not only inform, but really inform across a broad swath of information that's constantly changing. And if we get this budget passed before October 1st, it could also include more voter suppression laws. So we at Rutgers last time around in 2020 put together a fabulous LibGuide to really get our students more engaged, and was interactive so you could learn more. And it talked about the history and 100th anniversary of women voting, et cetera. So it was a great time to be better, to do a better job at informing. But we also realized we needed a partner on campus, and finding those campus partners really important. And at Rutgers, I mean, I'd like to think this because we were a partner, we put up tables in every library, including the smallest branches. And that year, Rutgers got the award for the greatest increase in participation. So, like I said, I'd like to think it's libraries that do it, but it's about all of us working together, and we need to be part of this conversation wherever we are. So other campuses have done some fabulous things in other libraries beyond campuses, but one that I'd like to pay particular homage to is at American University. The person who did that was on an ALA webinar recently. They have something called Absentee Ballot Day. Now remember, they're in DC. So they have very few students from DC. So they have to navigate all of these states and sometimes locals. And they not only help students and work with them, but they even bring stamps for the states. And in New Jersey, it's county by county. Which county requires you to put your own stamp on? So they really facilitate and get more engaged. And I think these are wonderful ways to really increase involvement, and increase involvement from the library with these efforts. So, but we're facing some really serious problems right now. Misinformation, which Frida so beautifully covered, but there's now these studies out about, the lack of civic literacy, fake news, and it even is happening before our eyes on Tuesday night, with fact checkers actually having to intervene during the debate. So we're really at a point where this civic literacy challenge is something that we need to embrace and get involved with. I have just come out with my own article on it in Library Quarterly. I hope you will, from January 2024. I hope you'll take a look at it, because I think it's our calling and something we need to do sooner rather than later. So we've gotten involved with media literacy, with information literacy, which are areas that are getting more engaged with our users. Civic literacy needs to be added to that array, but we definitely are engaged on these levels. But how can we use them more in our civic life, not just in the life of college and careers? ALA has joined up with many partners, including the League of Women Voters. And in addition to their general information project, they now are doing a test project in several states called the Democracy Truth Project. And if any of you are involved, I hope to hear from you, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity to work together with a really credible source to help our communities understand better or separate the truth from the false or whatever, misleading. So other ways we can get more involved. So in 2020, SRRT showed this movie called Rigged, the Voter Suppression Playbook. And after SRRT showed it, I contacted the producer. So we hosted them at Rutgers, but of course, virtually, because it was during the pandemic. But we got all these partners, including all the local public libraries and lots of academics on campus, as well as the Andrew Goodman Foundation, which specializes in voting and especially voting engagement on campus. And we had a wonderful forum about the issues of voter suppression. And I was really glad to see they just reran the video on our local PBS station in New Jersey. So that's great. So there's lots of other movies out there that have come out, videos. You know, we have lots of resources that we can tap into right now, but not just show these films or give lists of them, but actually have, you know, viewer discussion where we can really involve whoever our community is with discussions about these issues. So I also call your attention to the Libraries Transforming Communities effort by ALA. It's been going on now almost 10 years. I'm a great supporter of it and was involved from the beginning. And the resources are phenomenal. I will tell you about some of these approaches that we can use to get people more engaged. And I'm going to go through them fairly fast. But part of the Libraries Transform Communities effort was a piece of it called Models for Change. And we worked with a group called the National Coalition on Dialogue and Deliberation and other partners, including essential partners and the National Issues Forum Institute, of which I was on the board not once, but twice. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, we sort of refer to them as NIFI or NIFI. A little bit about the kinds of dialogue opportunities that can really engage your community in a whole different level when it comes to voting. So what all of these efforts are about is authentic, civil, productive conversations. So it now enables people to come together in a safe, but I like to call it also brave space, in a place either online or in person, where they share their stories and they try to better understand the issues, the problems, and hear from other people that their stories, so they can better understand, why do those people think the way they do? And sometimes as we explore possibilities like the costs, consequences, and trade-offs of some of these approaches to solving these problems, we start to realize they're not so simple. They're really complex, and we really need to open up possibilities for solving the problems, but also a mutual understanding so we can find what we call common ground to move forward. So this is really what we call democracy in practice. It's an opportunity to get civically involved, something that I get really excited about, for people to take action, not just to be passive, but to be active and own our democracy, find common ground for action, and then increase what we call social capital, trust, one of the things that's really missing from our world right now. So here's a picture of people doing a deliberation several years ago in Philadelphia, of all places, talking about the cost of healthcare, just so you see that people sit around in a circle and talk to each other. They're really kitchen table conversations. They do what they call deliberation, which is dealing with what we call wicked problems. That's not a simple problem, is there a hurricane coming? But what do we do after the hurricane to clean up? Very complex, wicked problems you can't just solve by, say, if you have a broken arm, setting it and then, waiting a while and it will heal. These things don't heal, they're complex. So the National Issues Forums and other groups like this, they put out all these different guides to help you work through issues. And they've got lots of facts like what Frida talked about and other kinds of ways to look at these problems and then a sort of script on how the public can talk about them. And I'm going to walk you through them. So since they have one on elections, I thought rather than tell you what a deliberative forum is, I'd walk you through this, but really fast because we don't have much time. You can look at it, but just to give you an overview. So these guides give you a background. So elections, how should we encourage and safeguard voting? I mean, this is where a lot of the tension is. We want to encourage, but we also want to make sure it's safeguarded. And, we want to make sure it's safeguarded, at least for the people we want to protect, right? So we get people together, they introduce themselves. It can be online, it can be in person. And we have usually a starter video. So if you haven't read the guide, you have a very short video, and those are available to learn about the basics. And all of these are done very neutrally. So they're not taking a position, they're just giving you background. And as you can see, the US this is from 2020, the US has actually improved its standing in the world in voter turnout. Whether or not it's going to do that this time, we don't know, but it was pretty low before. But you look how low it is in some countries. So you can see sort of where we are. So this is all background they're giving us, by the way. This is the booklet. I'm not giving you background. I'm telling you what's in the booklet. So they will give you a lot of visuals to help you deal with the topic, voter ID requirements. You can see which states, etc. So once we go through the background and the video, then we talk about the guidelines for a forum. And this is really important because the norms we're all going to follow. And basically, we want people to listen to each other and participate. We don't want any one person or two people to dominate the discussion. And these are led by qualified moderators. So we know how to keep you on track. And everyone is encouraged to participate. So what these guys usually do is set up a framework of different options of how you can approach the problem. But they're not solutions so much of different ways that people look at them. So in this example, option 1, we want to make it easier to register and vote. And then it gives you some background, and then it'll talk about what kind of actions you can take, but with some of the drawbacks from those actions. So we think very often, well, if we only did this, but this makes us think about, well, if we did that, what would be some of the drawbacks, the trade-offs as we talk about them? And I think we really don't often focus on, well, that's the strength, but what's also the weakness, and what would we have to trade off in order to do that? So we have a dialogue about the strengths, weaknesses, costs, consequences, and trade-offs of each of these options if we were to take action. And we do that in this case, there's 3 options. There's always more than 2 because you don't want it to be one or the other. And we end up finding common ground in all of them as people discuss them. So I'm going to just zip right through. You can see there's a 3rd option, offer more and better choices that you discuss. So you spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes discussing each of these. And then you do your closing, which is where you look at, well, what have we learned? What kind of common ground have we found? What did we agree on? And you can have people that are way on the other side of where you are, and you will find lots you agree on. And it's really eye-opening. And then what else do we need to talk about, and where can we go from here? And it's usually a really powerful discussion where neighbor to neighbor or people who've never met each other start to understand better why other people think the way they do. And about 30% to 40% of the time, people even change their minds, which is pretty extraordinary. So there is also an online version of this right now that you can do an online deliberation, which is a whole other way of doing it where you're not doing it in person, and very exciting. So these tools are available for you, and I encourage you to take advantage. Now, just quickly to tell you that There's different levels of goals when you do deliberation, very similar to that IAP2 spectrum, where the first level of goals is learning, something that we've talked about today. The second level is getting more involved. And the third level is how do we get out there and solve our community problems? So different ways to look at what you can do with these. There's lots of other models out there that can be things like participatory budgeting, which the New York Public Library has hosted. And I don't have time to talk about it, but it's a really cool way to distribute funds in your community. There's a group called Living Room Conversations doing building trust in elections. Their conversations are pretty easy to stage right in your own living room. And here's a little bit more about it. You can have you'll get my slides so you can look more closely at these. The Library of Congress is doing this unlocking civic knowledge program where they're looking at game development in some of these arenas. So there's some really exciting opportunities for us to involve our users more. So in closing, and then I'll give you some resources, I love quoting Robert Putnam, who was my speaker when I was president, my president's program speaker. Right when he came out with Bowling Alone, and he says citizenship is not a spectator sport. So I think it's really important for us to remember that without that engagement piece, it's really hard to get citizens to really become the agents of change and democracy that we want. So here's some more resources that I'll just arrow through real fast. The National Coalition on Dialogue and Deliberation, which we're a partner with, fabulous resources, but ALA also does have them under our libraries transforming communities. We have lots of great tools for you, including how to moderate these forums. You can watch the webinar and learn, and we have tools. There's partners that ALA is already involved with or local communities are. Look to partner. You can't do this alone. Voting is not what libraries do. Voting is what communities do. So find great partners to work with. Finally, we're looking forward to your questions, and thanks so much. I hope we'll have lots more opportunities to have these discussions.
All right, thank you. So I have been told in the chat that the Q&A isn't working, even though I have the Q&A on and I'm looking at it. So, we're going to blame Zoom on that. And it's pouring outside my library. So maybe it's that too. So I did see one question earlier, and this one I know is for Nancy. On the deliberations, there's the video, there's someone, is it facilitated for someone? You said there was a moderator to keep everyone on track, but is it also facilitated and led?
So it depends which one. So if you're doing them locally, you need a moderator. And we train you how to be moderators, or even better, the National Coalition on Dialogue and Deliberation has a map. You can find local trained moderators. You don't have to become it. There's lots in your community, and a lot of those moderators are looking for places just like libraries where they can hold these forums. So you don't even have to be the sponsor. You might just be the host. So yes, for national issues forums. But for some of these other kinds of dialogues, there's instructions on how to do them, but you don't have to have a trained moderator. It just depends. There's lots of mixes and matches, and I see Carolyn Kaywood is with us. She is one of the all-star moderators of all time and got trained through ALA years ago. She's in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I assume she's still in Virginia Beach. But there are librarians trained. I've done hundreds of these myself, but you don't need to find a librarian, but you do need a moderator. And moderators really help because they know how to deal with the tensions and controversies, how to keep people from attacking each other, for example. So.
All right. So I had a question, and this can be for anyone, all three of you. One thing that we're seeing with this election cycle is the impact of AI-generated content. So where do you think libraries fit in with kind of fighting against that or helping train our patrons to identify that AI content that is leading to this disinformation?
Well, if nobody's jumping in, I will say that I think this is a great topic to have a dialogue about rather than just telling them how. I mean, that our media literacy training should be getting heavily into this. And Frida might want to speak to that. And this is, I think, a real opportunity for school, academic, and public libraries to jump in on this. But in addition, is how do we have a conversation with our community? So they're not only being trained, but they're learning more about the pros, cons, consequences, and trade-offs of these developments.
I'll add on to that. It does have to be education is truly necessary in our high schools, very much so, since this is a evolving technology and it's constantly evolving at even a more faster rate than we've anticipated. But Nancy is totally right. Informing not only our patrons within our organizations, but the outside community in regards to understanding how to navigate it. And it's just more so doing our best to keep up with this constant evolution. It is not an easy task, but libraries have been doing this and staying up to date in all of the various other issues. So we have to attack it in the same way, same fashion.
Yeah, I agree with both. I think what we can also do is explain to people how AI works, that this large language model puts together just bunches of information from everywhere without checking whether it's true or false. And so they cannot rely on what they get through AI. It can have some truth and some false items. And so there is really no substitute for doing good research and relying on trusted sources, including librarians, to help people find reliable resources.
All right. We have a couple of questions coming in now. How do you get buy-in for programs that could be seen as potentially controversial? And this includes from patrons or your administration or board.
Would you please repeat the question? I didn't hear it.
I think this may be mostly for Nancy, but anyone can answer this. How do you get buy-in for the programs that could be potentially controversial or seen as controversial?
Okay, so well, part of it is we have to teach people what a deliberative forum is. And it is a so-called neutral space where we can have difficult conversations. So to start to see us as a convener rather than as a partisan in this. And people, when they experience it, they will help us communicate that. But it can be really challenging. One of the things that I do, and Carolyn Kaywood's here, who's done a million of these, and she did them through her library, is encourage people who might object to participate in a forum so they can experience it too. And it's a really great experience. I mean, one of these days I want to be a member of the group rather than the moderator so I can really participate. But I think once they see it, just like so many other things, they might be more prone to think it's a good idea. The groups like the National Issues Forums Institute have been working with libraries since the 1980s. So they have a really good reputation. A lot of these other groups have been working with ALA. So people have gotten to know them over the years. And there's a lot of libraries in this country that do amazing work in this arena. So I think we can look to some best practices on that issue. But it's a really good question. And I have some great examples that I won't take our time with to say that it can be thorny. But I think we can't be chilled, just like with banned books. We can't decide if somebody might be critical that we're not going to do it and take that route out. That we need to be not just safe, but we need to be brave.
Thank you. Aaron, this is a question for you. Quoting here, how often is the wonderful GODORT LibGuide reviewed and updated?
as much as possible, traditionally, I know every 2 years we've tried to make sure that it's ready for, at least in the last few cycles, the general election and the midterm. There has been discussion about going a little bit deeper and seeing if we can do that, and that's something that is going to have to be taken under consideration. Seeing some jurisdictions have off-year elections. For in the case of Virginia, they have governor's elections the year following general election. But traditionally,
Virginia and New Jersey.
And New Jersey.
Two off, and we get horrible turnout, I might say. But that's
Yep, Nancy's right, and New Jersey as well. But traditionally, every 2 years, we do offer, if inside the LibGuide, at the bottom of the LibGuide, we do offer, if there are issues that we see. So say, for example, you may notice that you desire the information to be updated or such because times may have changed. We have that information, and usually the turnaround, more so, we've gotten better with the turnaround of getting that information updated. So right now, it's about 2 years, but we are looking at the possibility and discussing if we can go a little bit more frequent. But again, right now, every 2 years for the general and the midterm elections.
Thank you. All right, we're a little over time, but one last call for questions. All right. So I know the one thing that everyone has been wondering, yes, this is being recorded, and we will get this recording up as soon as we can, should be by the end of the month. When I send out the link to the recording to the registrants, I will also try to send out the slides, the resources. There were some resources mentioned in the chat. And then I believe there's a request for the transcript. So we'll just send you a big email with lots of links to lots of things. And thank you, everyone, for doing this again. It was equally as great as it was at ALA. So thank you.
And thank you, April, for
Thank you so much,
facilitating
April.
it. Thank you to the other panelists, Nancy, Aaron. Pleasure to be on a panel with you. And thanks to the audience for your great questions.
And get your communities, be they schools, campuses, or local communities, to get out there and vote. It's important, if not more important, for them to vote. Think about these local and state issues as it, I mean, the federal's really important, but what affects them every day is what happens locally, and nobody has the information except us. So it's up to us to be that connection to our local communities, which we do so well anyway.
Hear, hear. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Bye-bye.